actually quite fitting for our next guest here today, who we're very honored to have with us today. You see, Newark used to be a place where complacency was what we've done best. You had everyone was great to be the F student. Instead of trying to figure out a way to build a better life for the community and for the people who live within it, we ended up with a community of people who were glad to be on welfare assistance. And not that there's anything wrong with receiving social service benefits if you have to have them, but to be in a place where you grow complacent with that. And instead of from one generation to the next, you build and become better people, you continue to, what a lot of people say, bottom feed and not grow at all, to not use your intelligence. So instead of being leaders, you had all followers. And then one thing very fortunate for the city of Newark happened. A man came to our city and said that he saw the promise in the people in this community. And instead of allowing people to sit there and continue to sit in the back of the classroom, instead of allowing people to continue to bully people around, he stood strong and he decided that he would make a change. So we're fortunate to go from having a community where our buildings were torn down or run down, where our schools were in such bad shape that we couldn't get kids to try out for the football team or the baseball team because we didn't have football fields or baseball fields. We had more guns and knives in the schools than we had children in the classroom ready to be educated. Until we were very fortunate to have a leader come into our community and stand up and do the right thing. Until we had a leader come into our community and say it's time for a change. And instead of having run down buildings, I think just last week we opened up the first supermarket that the city has seen in decades. In a city that no one wanted to come to and visit, he opened up the Prudential Center, which now is one of the most visited arenas in the world. And I say all that, and he's a very humble man, and we're great to have him here as our mayor, but it's very fitting to have him here as our leadership speaker today, because what he does is tremendous and it's amazing, but it is a model for all of us to follow. And one day we can all help do the things that he does. And in a small way, we can do them now in your schools, in the different clubs and organizations that you're a part of. Just stand strong and be the leader that you know you can be. That's why you're here today, because we all know that you're amazing leaders. So without further ado, I'll give you our mayor for the
I've got a leash here and I'm going to try to get rid of. There we go. So I'm so excited to be here. That was a really kind introduction, but way overstating the case. Newark right now is getting better, not because of one leader. It never is about who we elect president or who we elect governor or who we elect mayor. The reality is things change because people demand it so. And this is a city that's moving ahead in a dramatic way. The biggest economic development period in Newark in over a generation. The first new hotels in our downtown, office towers, new restaurants, businesses, doubling the production of affordable housing. I could go on and on and on. The biggest parks expansion in a century. All these things are happening because all the folks in Newark are focusing forward and making that change happen. From activists in our communities, to block leaders, to nonprofit leaders, to clergy leaders. It's all about leadership. And what excites me right now is I am standing in front of a group of people who are also leaders. Is that right? Yes. That doesn't sound like leaders. That's right. If I said that to leaders, they'd say, that's right. So are you guys leaders? Oh, magnanimous. All right. So I actually believe I have a friend of mine who is now a billionaire, not quite literally, and I remember taking a walk with him once out in Silicon Valley, and he was telling me that he likes to hire really young people because they don't know what they can't do yet, and therefore, by not believing they have limits, they tend to exceed other people's expectations. And if you think about leadership on a global historical perspective, the greatest movements for social change since the 1960s, at the root of them, have been young people like you all. If you think about Tiananmen Square and the protests for democracy there, if you think about Soweto and the uprisings to end apartheid, if you think about the Solidarity movement in Poland for workers' rights, if you think about Birmingham, Alabama in the 1960s for the civil rights movement, if you think about the Arab Spring, you will see at the core of those movements have always been energized, focused, prisoners of hope, visionaries that were young people in our globe. And so, as a guy who is starting to become a little frustrated with the lack of leadership by my generation, the X generation, or the generation ahead of me, the baby boomers, I really have more and more faith and hope for your generation, the millennials, for what you guys can do. And so, far be it from me, as this politician from Newark, to stand here and lecture you guys about leadership. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I've learned or had to reaffirm about leadership in my experiences here in Newark and for my family. Is that all right? Yeah. The left of the room is doing so much better than the right. I don't want to make any political judgments. But the left seems a little stronger than the right over there. I don't know what that's about. I prefer the center. I prefer moderation. So, look, you guys are probably in your teenage years, am I correct? Yeah. There's nobody here fronting as a teenager that's like 21 Jump Street, you're not like really 30. No? Okay, good. So, this is something that I have a little bit more perspective on, is parents. Now, I'm not a parent. My parents wish I was a parent. They settled for me just getting married. But I want to just, this is the one thing I might say that you might find condescending. I have a little bit more experience with being parented than you do. And I'm telling you right now, you will be 40 years old and your parents will still be trying to parent you. And the funny thing about this is once you have my perspective, you realize that your parents really don't have that many stories to tell you. And they will tell you the same stories over and over until you're 40. But this is the wonderful thing. If your parents are like mine, and they might not be, but if your parents are like mine, when they tell you their stories, after 20 years, you begin to realize that some of the facts begin to change as the story unfolds. Now, I don't want to call parents out, but my father, for example, the stories seem to have gotten far more extreme the older he's getting. When he was young, he used to say, "Oh, Corey, I was born poor." Now, if he hears me say that, I'm like a mayor, and my father's heckling me. If I start talking about my dad was born poor, he goes, "Boy, what you talking about?" I wasn't born poor, I was po. P.O., I couldn't afford the other two letters. And the climactic patterns. My father's from North Carolina, in the mountains. But the climate has severely changed during the stories that he tells. So first as a child, it was always like a thunderstorm. It was like it was always raining. It was like that was Seattle or something, yeah? And then the hail began. And the hail began the size of golf balls. Then soccer balls. Now he tells stories and there was hail the size of Cadillacs falling to the ground. And his schoolhouse went from a segregated schoolhouse to a one-room schoolhouse. Now he tells these stories where the schoolhouse was a lean-to on the side of the mountain. And the arguments I now have with my father, and I'm trying to be respectful, it's one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt honor thy mother and father, but I'm sorry, Dad, they do not have tsunamis in the mountains of North Carolina. It's impossible. It's impossible. And so, like, my dad, though, has this one story that I know is apocryphal. I know it's apocryphal, but I love the story because it's one of the themes he's tried to impart to my brother and I, which was about him in a classroom when he was a little boy, or lean-to, whatever, depending on what decade he was telling me the story. In the 80s, it was a classroom. Now it's a lean-to. And he said he was sitting there, and a teacher came into the classroom, and four of these young kids, and the teacher stood there, first day of class, she's like, class, I want to teach you all about self-esteem. And the kids were like looking at this woman, she goes, now I think there might be some people who think they're dumb and stupid in this classroom. And I want to know that right now. You got to believe in yourself. If you think you're dumb and stupid, tell me who you are. Stand up. And she just looks around the way. She goes, come on, if you think you're dumb, you think you're stupid, I want you to stand up right now. And nobody stood. But my father says he's in the back room. He just pushed his chair back and he stood up. And the teacher stood there looking at him and said, Mr. Booker boy, what's wrong with you? You think you're dumb? You think you're stupid? And my father said he just scratched his head and said, well, shucks, ma'am, I don't think I'm stupid, but I didn't want you to be the only one standing. So this was the lesson of my childhood, which was simply this: stand up. People in life are going to heap stuff on you. They're going to try to bury you with negativity, the nattering nabobs of negativity, the negaholics, as I call them, the people who look at you. People are like writing that word down. Negaholic. How do you spell that, man? Dear God, you got the brainiacs in here, for crying out loud, taking every note down. I'm watching. I got you two on the right. On the left, over here and here. No, the left fails me now. The left is done. They're dead. Dear God. I need to go back over here to Mitt Romney and Santorum. You're failing me. All right. So, this is what life is about. It's about standing up for who you are. It's about screaming to the universe, not with your words, but with your essence. Screaming to the universe that you are here. Tell your truth every single day. There's a president named Abraham Lincoln who said so boldly, he said, everyone is born an original, but sadly most die copies. Are you guys going to die copies? This right, the right is just taken off. No. The most important thing you can do in your life is be authentic. Not to let the world dictate to you, not to conform to the world as it is. To demand that the world conform to you. Because conformists don't make change. It's those people who are creative, who are innovative, who are unique, who are spectacular, who don't play small, but decide to unleash their light into this world. Now, when it comes to leadership, leadership is not a position or a title. It is an everyday behavioral thing. And leaders are folks that have power that comes truly from their loyalty to their own truth. I've seen this time and time again about how people bend to the will of others, conform to what they think is acceptable, who don't dare to be different, who are afraid to step out for scorn or for teasing or for what have you. Leadership is not about popularity, it is about purpose. It's not about celebrity, it's about significance. We all should be questing a life of purpose, a life of significance. Now, I'll tell you this. When I moved to Newark, New Jersey, I was a law student. And I moved on to, Chris Rock has this joke, the great prophet of America. He says, why is it the most violent street in every city is named for the man who stood for nonviolence? And in the mid-90s, Martin Luther King Boulevard in Newark had a lot of different realities. In fact, we are kind of on Martin Luther King Boulevard right now. It's a great, glorious street, but there was a section of King Boulevard that was kind of messed up. And I moved onto that street thinking that as a law student, I was here to make change. And I was kind of full of myself. And I'll never forget that here I was, this Yale law student, and somebody told me that if I was going to make change in this neighborhood, I had to meet the woman that was a tenant president of the high-rises on that street, a place called Brick Towers, right down south from where we are right now. And I'll never forget showing up at her doorstep, knocking on her door, open the door, she says, "Who are you?" And I felt like John Wayne. I'm like, ma'am, little Philly? I'm Cory Booker from Yale Law School. In the neighborhood, I'm here to help you. And this woman looked at me like I was crazy, you know? And here was this strong, proud, African-American tenant president who just looks at me and says, you want to help me? Almost like she knew that I needed some help. And she says, you want to help me? Fine. And she closed the door behind her. She said, follow me. And I said, okay. And she walks down 5 flights of stairs, through the lobby of the building, through the courtyard, down the steps to Martin Luther King Boulevard, and she goes right in the middle of Martin Luther King Boulevard. And cars are passing this way and that, and she stands in front of me and she says, you want to help me? I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, well, tell me what you see around you. And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, tell me what you see around you. And I said, okay, I see high-rise buildings. I see an abandoned building over there that's used for drugs. I see graffiti. I just started describing the neighborhood. And the more I talked, the more disgusted she looked. Crossing her arms, scowling at me. And finally I stopped. And she said, you can never help me. She turns around, she walks away. And I chase after this woman, and I stop her on the side of the street, and I go, what are you talking about? And she wheels around, looks at me hard in the eye, and she says, you need to understand something. That the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. And if you're one of those people who opens their eyes and all you see is problems and darkness and despair, it's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people that every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see opportunity, you see love, you see the face of God, then you can be someone who helps B-boy. And she walked away, leaving me there on the side of the street, staring at my feet, thinking to myself, okay, grasshopper, let's end the lesson. You see, I've come to realize that how you perceive the world actually creates more truth in the world. If you see problems, there are problems. But if you see opportunities, if you see solutions, if you see not barriers, but blessings, not problems, but possibilities, if you're one of those people who infects the world with your own perspective, and we all do that, negative or positive, but if you do that in a positive way, you could actually begin to change reality. Now look, my experience in Newark, I got my BA from Stanford, but I got my PhD in the streets of Newark, and that was one of my great professors. Because I came back, and I came correct. Knocked on her door the next day. I said, hello. I'm back. And I ended up doing this weird experience for me for a year or two, where I would travel from New Haven, Connecticut, down to Newark, where my apartment was, and I would sit at this woman's kitchen table. And here I would see other women from the building coming together, strategizing around this table about how to help somebody stay in their apartment that was behind on rent, how to take on this awful slumlord that controlled the building, what to do for some of the kids in the neighborhood. In fact, they took what I saw as a dank basement in the bottom of that building, and they transformed it on every holiday imaginable. I mean, they had Flag Day parties, and I mean, they had the best 4th of July parties I've ever been to, and there were no Irish people within blocks of that neighborhood. They had more strength than people gave them credit for. People, by the will of their spirit, by the vision that they had, and by the capacity to love, they created change. They were leaders. And this is the thing that we all forget. This idea of love. I'm sorry, it may sound corny or cheesy, but love. What my parents made clear to me is that all of us here are here, as smart as we may think we are, as hardworking as we are, as courageously unique as we are. When other people are going out playing videos, we're studying. We are probably good at what we do, but I'm telling you right now, we're all here because of a conspiracy of love, of people who came before us, who did things. Look, my dad, despite all the stories and the glorious hyperbole, the truth of the matter is my dad was born to a single mother who couldn't take care of him. And it was that conspiracy of love, names of people I don't even know, who took him in, fed him, put a roof over his head. When it was time for him to go to college, he couldn't afford college, he was just going to work. And the town, my father, this Thanksgiving, we were going around saying what we were thankful for. My father started crying. As he was saying, I'm thankful that there were people in this town whose names he can't remember that put dollar bills in envelopes to give him enough money to pay his first semester tuition so he can get in school, get a job, work to stay in school. And the conspiracy continued. I had one of the greatest honors of my life that I hope and believe that some of you will have. I got to be the commencement speaker for Fisk University, my mom's university, last year on her 50th reunion. And here's my mother on the night before dinner. She takes me by the hand, still like I'm that little boy. And she takes me to table after table and introduces me to her classmates, who in the early 60s, she said, this is the young lady that led our youth marches for civil rights. These are the people, they sat in at lunch. It was almost like she was saying to me, in translation, this person marched for you. This person sat in for you. This person faced expulsion for you. This one was arrested for you. These are names I don't know. But they were part of a conspiracy of love. It didn't stop then. Both my parents graduated, went to Washington, D.C. That's where they met and married, but they weren't hiring black people then. Big companies weren't. And so black people and white people, this conspiracy of love, came together and said, we're going to change that. And they created an organization called the Urban League that actually had businesses challenge them to start hiring blacks. And my dad became the first African-American hired, one of the first African-Americans hired by Sinclair Oil Company. It's still a company out there. Then he became one of the first blacks to get hired by Woodrow's and Latham, a department store that's still there. Then they both became two of the first wave of African-Americans hired by a small tech company you never heard of it called IBM. And they were making money that was unheard of in that time for African-Americans. And you know what? Then they moved up to New Jersey. Now, they find out, as they look for school systems that were really good, that real estate agents wouldn't show blacks in neighborhoods. But there was this conspiracy of love going on. Blacks and whites who came together in this state and formed something in the late 60s, early 70s called the Fair Housing Council. And so when my parents would go to a house to look at it, they were told the house is sold. They would walk away, and the Fair Housing Council would send a couple out, Mr. and Mrs. Brown, but they were not brown. And the Browns would go and see that the house was for sale. When my parents finally saw a house they loved, they left the Browns, they told it was not for sale anymore. The Browns came, of course the house was still for sale. The Browns made a bid for my parents, pretending they were them. The bid was accepted. On the day of the closing, this conspiracy of love is incredible. On the day of the closing, my dad and a lawyer, whose name I don't know, he's part of the conspiracy, they show up at the real estate office and they say, you're in violation of New Jersey fair housing law. They say that, sir, you produced a contract for the Browns, you should now produce a contract for the Bookers. The real estate agent didn't even let them talk. He gets up and punches the lawyer in the face. He sings a dog on my dad. Now there is some debate in my family about the size of the dog. For my father, it was Cujo. My mom whispers to me, it was Toto. A court case later, we move into a small town in New Jersey called Harrington Park. And we were the first black family to move there. My dad used to call us the 4 raisins and a tub of vanilla ice cream. But I'm growing up around a kitchen table with these parents who said, don't you ever, I know you worked hard, I know you're successful, I know you're on the honor roll, I know you're your class president, hey, I know you're an All-American high school football player, but don't you dare walk around this house feeling so peacock sure that walking around like you hit a triple when you were born on third base. All of us in this room, we benefited from a conspiracy of love. We drank deeply in terms of the privilege. We drank deeply from wells of freedom and opportunity that we did not dig. We lavishly from banquet tables that were prepared for us by our ancestors. And we could do 2 things in our life. In front of that bountiful table, we could just consume and consume and consume, getting dumb, fat, and happy. Or we could take those blessings and metabolize them within our system and let them motivate us to be a part of that conspiracy of love. Because I'm telling you right now, we still do not live in an America that is what it proclaims to be. That's a radical statement. If I was running for president, they would run that loop. Say, Cory hates America. But let me tell you what I mean. Because there's nobody that loves this country more because it gave me everything that I am. Let me tell you what I mean. I hear it. Kids from Oakland to the Bronx stand up and say those 5 words that you all know. Part of one of the most profound pledges in humanity. They say those last 5 words, liberty and justice for all. Those words have been motivating generation after generation. It motivated whites and blacks to fight along the underground railroad and create passages for freedom. It motivated that conspiracy love when people said we've got to end sweatshops. It motivated people that said we've got to end child labor and create public schools. It motivated people that said if you are a woman, you have equal rights in this country, you can vote, you can get equal pay, you can do whatever you want to. It motivated people that say laws that say blacks and whites can't sit together, go to school together, eat together. It's motivated generation after generation, this ideal of equality and freedom, but we still live in a country where, just based on the zip code you live in, gives you different opportunities. We still live in a country where healthcare is not equally distributed. We still live in a country where access to education is not equally distributed. We still live in a country that is not living up to its highest aspirations. And we have an obligation. Because we are here because people believe. How dare we stop believing? And this gets back to you and I. In life you have one choice every moment of your life. One choice you have every moment of your life. And that choice is to accept things as they are or take responsibility for changing it. And this is big and small. There are those of us who walk down the street, and I watch these people. I'm weird. I get misty-eyed when I see small acts of kindness. We walk down the street. Some people accept the street as it is. I have some friends that are determined every day they're going to bend down at least once and pick up a piece of trash they see in the streets. Small acts of kindness. You never know in a moment. In fact, the biggest thing you can do in any day of your life, the biggest thing you can do is a small act of kindness. Because leadership is not a goal, it's not an end. Leadership is an everyday thing. Excellence is not a goal or an end. Excellence is an everyday thing. Love is not something you seek. Ooh, baby, baby, won't you love me down? No! Love is some way that you live. Don't make me sing. Obama did it, but I can do it better. Don't make me sing.
Please sing.
Wrong. Sing it, man. Sing it.
It's the right. It's the right. The left's tried, but the right's got it. Love is an everyday choice. Attitude is not something that happens, it's a choice. You having a good day is not a matter of chance. You having a good day is a matter of choice. Let me give you one more example. Let me shut up and get off the stage. One more example. Let me give you an example. I feel so loved. I'm a politician. We have fragile egos. Love me, please. So I was this teenager, and I was flying from Newark Airport to go back to school at Stanford University, the San Francisco Airport. And you all have to understand something. If you're looking at me from the stage, I am 6'3". I'm a bit, my brother was, damn. Brother, I'm taller than you, but you got a lot more hair than I got. So count your blessings, man. Count your blessings. I think you should shave that, man. Just like, you make all of us bald guys a little jealous. Just shave it down. I got some clippers in the car. Let's get me back there. Just want that hair. And you're styling it all flat. You got a car down the middle. I can't do that with my hair. All right. you know, and you're crammed in like a middle seat. It's horrible. It's a bad thing. You're 6'3", people look back there, they lean back, and it's like, oh, my knee. So here I am on this flight. It's a packed flight. And by the way, you can see the state of evolution of your own soul or somebody else in the smallest moments, how they deal with crowded airports, what their attitude is when they're trying to untangle Christmas lights. You know, what happens, how they act when they can't find the remote control. I can't find that remote, it's gotta be. How we act in the smallest of moments will always reveal the evolution of our soul. And so here I am on this flight, and you have to understand, I was a big guy back then. I was a Stanford football player. Like, would you do me a favor, close your eyes for a second, because I was chiseled. Just picture that. Chiseled. I was the original New Jersey situation. I was a rock when he was just a pebble. I used to be able to do that with my pecs. All right. I was chiseled then, now I just jiggle. Things move that never moved before. All right, here we go. So, I get on this plane. And it's just packed plane. But you know what? The door closes, every seat is full except for the entire row that I'm on is open. And I'm like, this is amazing. And of course, I was not as evolved as a teenager as you guys are. I immediately thought, God loves me more than he loves them. I am his favorite son. They must have terrible plane karma. And so I'm sitting back there and I start singing. I grew up in a black church, so sometimes you just gotta rejoice. Yes, Jesus loves me. And then all of a sudden, just as I'm getting to my second and third verse of that song, Whitney Houston, God Bless You, I sang with her spirit. And suddenly, the door to the plane opens. And the whole plane fills with this cacophonous noise, like somebody was being killed outside. The screams were unbelievable. Everybody shuts up and just is staring at the door. And then walking in is this woman carrying this nuclear-powered speaker, otherwise known as a baby. And a little boy. Everybody is staring at this screaming baby and the woman and the boy, and then suddenly, as if choreographed, all the heads turn and look at me. And every single person, they didn't have to say it, I could read their minds, they were thinking, you smug bastard. And as they walked closer to me, I quickly in my mind, my religious, spiritual mind, I found the appropriate Bible verse. Dear Lord, why hast thou forsaken me? And then she says, excuse me, sir, I'm sitting there as she stands there with her woofer and tweeter. And I say, okay. And I get up and they move in and they sit down. And I sit down and I have an evolved thought for a 19-year-old. I wasn't where you guys are, but this thought entered into my self-absorbed reality, which was, this is either going to be the worst flight of my life, or I can make it the best. Because I have more control than I realize. In fact, Alice Walker said it, the most common way people give up their power is not realizing they have it in the first place. And so I turned around and just started talking to the woman, and as soon as I got out of my own drama, I realized, here was this woman, had everybody on the plane just tearing her apart with their eyes, just looking at her and that baby, and under their breath saying things, and she was so embarrassed. So I started talking to her, making her lighten up a little bit, and the young boy and I, as the plane took off, I said, let me play with him, and just we played tic-tac-toe and hangman, and he kept beating me. And as we flew, I'm just having a great time. We're talking, we're laughing. The young boy and I are really hitting it off. I'm telling him all of my best jokes appropriate for a 7-year-old. I've got great material, guys, for 7-year-olds. Why did Tigger and Eeyore have their heads in the toilet? the Oscar-nominated movie called Street Fight? Some people have. It's a documentary about my first race for mayor in Newark. And it was caught the tough election. It was won the Tribeca Film Festival. You can get it on Netflix. It was nominated for an Academy Award, and it lost to this movie called March of the Damn Penguins. That was the original title. That was the original title. They changed it because they wanted to make it rated G. But I tell you, I hate penguins with a passion uncontested. They're flightless rodents. They're not cute. Happy feet, my backside. I am a vegetarian, but I now make an exception for penguin meat. It tastes just like chicken. Oh, there's some penguin lovers over here. Please. I love Pittsburgh, hate their hockey team. So, that movie captured the toughness of that first race. It was a really brutal election. And on my most discouraging day, I get this letter in the mail. And this person says in the letter, you may not remember me, but I met you 15 years ago. And I met you on an airplane flight that I thought was going to be really hard. It was my first time flying with my kids. And the letter went on just to talk about how the kindness that I showed, what that meant to that person at that point in their life. And then they went on to say, and by the way, we own a factory in the city of Newark. We employ a lot of Newark residents. And amazingly, they invited me to the factory to talk to the residents that they'd already talked to about my character. And that little boy who was suffered through my jokes was now a young man and became one of the best campaign volunteers we had. And of course they gave us a campaign contribution as well. Guys, that's the power we have. During that election, my grandfather died. I'll never forget, I was on 18th Avenue, Newark. I'll never forget the moment pulling over to the side of the street. And the person on the phone said, call your grandfather. Call your grandmother, excuse me. And I didn't. I sat there and cried. And all I could think about was the last time I saw my grandfather was when his body was racked with cancer. I was with him, and I was leaving the room, and he said to me, I love you. And I turned around thinking I was going to have a meaningful moment with him, and then he went on and said, I love your kids, and I love your grandkids. And then I thought, oh, this man's just delirious. The cancer's really got him. I don't have kids. I don't have grandkids. And I left. And here I am on the side of 18th Avenue here, and we were crying about the loss of one of my greatest heroes. And all of a sudden, I found some meaning in his words. You see, there's this nuclear physicist I talked to, a astrophysicist I talked to, who tells me that when we look at night at the stars, some of those stars are millions and millions of light years away. It takes that long for the light to travel, but some of those stars actually may be out, but we're still seeing them as if they're there because their light goes on in perpetuity. And as I thought about my grandfather, I realized that that's what our love is. Our love is our light. When we have the courage to shine it brightly, brilliantly, when we have the courage to tell our truth, explain our testimony, that's our light. And that nothing could diminish that. Even after we're gone, that's going to go on forever. And I knew that my grandfather lived so boldly his love, was so courageous with his light, that even though he's gone, my children yet unborn will experience that love and benefit from it. My grandchildren yet unborn will be touched by that love, just like I feel the love today of those people that stormed beaches on Normandy for me. I feel the love today of that Quaker along the Underground Railroad that helped people escape to freedom. I feel the love today of that ancestor of mine who scrubbed toilets and scrubbed floors, who carried bedpans just to keep the food on the table. I feel the love today of that woman my mom introduced me to, who, even though she was threatened with being expelled from school, still went out and marched and sat in and engaged in civil disobedience. I feel that love today because those people stood up. And that is all that life asks of you. To be someone who stands up and tells this world your truth, who stands up and realizes that, as King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It must be carried in on the backs of people that stand up. That we must stand, because what Frederick Douglass said is true. In life, we don't get everything we pay for, but we must pay for everything that we get. We must stand up. We must stand up because people stood for us. They fought for us. They bled for us. They died for us. We must stand up because this world still has dark places, because the shadows still hang over some of our most noble ideals, because the dawn must come for some people who have lost their hope. We must stand up because this world is starving, yearning, hungering for heroes, for leaders, for you. With something my parents told me. This was not an exaggeration. I end with a poem they would read me as a child, calling me to stand and to believe in this nation and to fight for her dream. It's the end of a long poem by Langston Hughes, and I say it and I have to go. Langston Hughes wrote, "Oh, let America be America again. The land that never has been yet, but yet must be the land where everyone is free. The poor man, the Indian, the Negro, me. Who made America? Whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must make our mighty dream live again. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me. But I swear this oath, America will be." May you all stand. May you all swear your oath, not with your words, but with your deeds, with your actions, not in some distant battle, but today, now, may you show your love and be a part of that conspiracy that ultimately makes real on the promise of a great nation, so that we all may stand one day and join in the chorus of our ancestors and say, "We are now finally a nation, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last." Thank you, everybody.